Hello, this is Mark Lancy. Along with Kathy Shire, I'm the co-chair of the geothermal project. This report gives you kind of a wrap up of the project, tells you where we are and what's left to do. So it's about time for a quick tour of the sub-basement to see how this all came out. So I'm standing here in the basement level, and you can see we now have a new alarm there in case the refrigerant ever leaks from any of those heat pumps, so nobody goes down there before we ventilate it. And on the door, our boiler room has become the geothermal equipment room. So let's see what we've got down here. The first thing you'll notice is we no longer have a stairwell down there. We have a vertical ladder. This is to give us more footprint down below for the equipment. Additionally, it's no longer just concrete walls. We've actually cleaned it up, painted it. So let's go down the ladder and take a look. This is the heat pumps themselves. You see we've painted the floors and walls, and really makes it easier to maintain and find issues down here. And these are the three heat pumps themselves. This is the other side of the heat pumps. You can see the orange boxes there are motor controllers for all the valves that send the hot and cold water to the appropriate heat pump, so that we can set all heat out, direct the cooling water from the ground wells to the proper heat pump, and then the output, be it hot water or cold water or both, because we can heat and cool in the spring at the same time. We can heat rooms on the north side of the building and cool rooms on the south side of the building. And these orange valves are all the components that are directed by the building management system to send the right temperature water to the right places. The last report we shared with the congregation was in late November after we brought the system online. December was focused primarily on just getting everything working right. So this report covers January through March, and we'll talk about the overall performance of the system as well as the other specific topics shown here on the slide. Overall, the system performance has exceeded our expectations. Very importantly, through this exceptionally cold winter where we had colder than normal temperatures and for more extended periods, the system proved that absolutely without a doubt, it can heat the entire building with room to spare. That means we did not need any additional means of heating the building, and we only used probably 75% of our total heating capacity. So there's plenty of room in the system to handle cold weather. The new management system has proven to be outstanding, and you'll hear more about that later. It has enabled us to get much better control space by space, room by room throughout the building, and to monitor how in detail all the components are operating. Additionally, our initial rough analysis, and I emphasize this is rough, so it's not final yet, but based on 4 months of operation, it appears the system's operating more efficiently than we had calculated. That means we're using, instead of more electricity than we had with the oil and electric air conditioning, we're using less, and that was not expected. So that's great news if that pans out over the whole year here. So we'll see how that goes, but we're optimistic. We did have one component failure and some outages, which we'll talk about shortly. Some specific issues we had, which you probably noticed if you were in the church, is back in the beginning of January, we had the motor controller for the fan in one of our air handling units fail. A motor controller is an electronic solid state component that varies the speed of the motor and thus varies the speed of the fan depending on how much airflow the system calls for down in the rooms. We discovered that the replacement part was surprisingly hard to find, and it took us almost 5 days searching the country to find that part and get it here. So we looked at the whole system and found there's only 2 or 3 of these type controllers that were a single point of failure. We have many of them, but they usually have 2 pumps or 2 controllers so that there's always redundancy. But for the air handling units, there's only 1. So we ordered and now have in stock spares for the couple in the air handling units. If this ever occurs again, it shouldn't take us as long. Then we had 3 shutdowns that were unanticipated, and that resulted in a couple cold Sunday mornings. And this was all due to all of them unanticipated issues interfacing vendor software. That means, for example, the air handling unit talks to the building management system, which talks to the heat pumps, and they all should work together to turn the heat pumps on, blow the right amount of air, turn the right amount of heating on the radiators, and so forth. Well, each of the vendors for each of those components writes their own code for their unit. And then our building management system ties this all together. And it's very complicated, and sometimes you just can't anticipate what's going to happen. So there were a couple instances like that. We believe that we've got that corrected, certainly for the heating cycle. And then as we move into the summer with the air conditioning, we'll continue monitoring. If anything like that comes up with the air conditioning, we'll get it corrected. Part of this experience also showed us that the built-in alarms that we receive at home, if nobody's in the building when one of these shutdowns occurs, did not cover all possible shutdowns. So they've added software alarms so that we should get notice of any type of shutdown and can act on it properly even in the middle of the night. We also found that some of the set points that the vendors and then the building management system put in for the shutdowns were overly conservative and some were unnecessary. So we've modified those shutdowns. I mentioned earlier that the new building management system is very detailed and very easy to understand it goes down to individual components and it records a lot of information about them that we can then use to analyze performance of the system. We never had anything like this before. That's the good news. Bad news is when we started monitoring all the components, some of the old components, things that were reused from our older HVAC systems, such as the control valves for the fin tube radiators, other heating control valves for some of the variable air volume units that are in the ducting that reheat the air to individual rooms, and some of our thermostats didn't work. Additionally, we found one heating coil that, due to low flow over the years, had plugged sometime in the past. So we had to unplug that heating coil. We had to replace maybe a half a dozen thermostats, half a dozen radiator control valves, some air damper controls. That took us really until the beginning of March to identify all that. We complete the repairs, and we're still doing a few of them, which we anticipate will be done by the end of March. This took us longer than we had anticipated, but I'm going to write this one off as growing pains that in the end make us much healthier, if you can accept that. Thank you. Most of the time in January through March goes into what we use the term grooming. And what that means is we have to very patiently make gradual adjustments to the airflow rates through the heating ducts coming down from the air handling units in the roof, to the system set points, the temperatures that the various components trigger on and off, as well as the set points for all the individual rooms, depending on how they're used, and the schedule for the use of those rooms, and some changes to software components so that all the right amount of heat that heats all the various rooms, each of which has some different amount of heating, like a corner room needs more heating than a room in the middle of a corridor, and so forth, so that all the rooms are at the right temperature at the right time. You can think of this, if I was to paint a picture for it, imagine on your front lawn, you had 45 garden hoses. Yes, 45 garden hoses. They all hooked to one faucet. And then you have a giant fan with over 200 hoses coming off of it because we have over 200 air diffusers in our various rooms. Every one of those air diffusers has a valve that can adjust the airflow in that. And some of them have, maybe half of them, also have heating coils in those air hoses, in those 200 air hoses. And you have to make adjustments to all of this so that the right amount of heating and water gets out of your garden hoses and out of your 200 plus air hoses. And every time you change one, since you only hook the garden hoses all to one faucet and the air hoses all hooked to one fan, it changes all of them. So it's a very patient process. You make small changes, you look how it goes, you watch the performance of the rooms over a couple of days, you make another small change. And then if you find failed components along the way, you got to fix that or other changes that we might have to make. So this has been a very time consuming process, but we are very, very close now at the end of March to being complete with that. And we're very happy with how the rooms are performing across the board. We only have one or two more that we're doing a few tweaks on, and we think we're going to be there. So hopefully that explanation helps you understand where all the man hours and why it took time over the last 3 months to groom all these rooms. Couple additional points on grooming. First of all, none of this would have been possible without a modern new building management system that we have. So that is really paying for itself over and over again. And secondly, we've only seen the system operate through the heating cycle. We have yet to do the spring-fall transitions, in which time the geothermal system will be in the mixed mode of heating some rooms and cooling other rooms, and the summer when it'll be cooling. So we're going to continue to monitor this process and the room temperature and performance through and into the next winter with the help of our vendors and contractors to ensure that the system's going to work properly and be groomed in all modes of operation throughout the year. Our facilities manager, Emilio Del Vecchio, has been spearheading the restoration effort inside the church. This is the painting, repairing plaster dings, floor tiles that were broken, ceiling work, and so forth. That's essentially complete with inside the church, and it looks excellent. Hope you take a look around and stairwells, hallways. We didn't just restore where work had been done. There's a lot of overall work done so that the painting all looks coherent, the colors are right, and so forth. There's a little bit more that remains with landscaping outside the church, which we'll do when the weather's appropriate. We're coming up on a very important next step, which is to apply for the federal incentive payments. This is spearheaded by Mitch Coddington, our treasurer. We'll actually be submitting tax return. Who knew that a nonprofit submits a tax return? Something I learned here. And we'll be able to claim 40% of the total geothermal project costs. This is not only the cost of what we paid to Greener U for the actual system itself, but also the cost, for example, of our moving our operations to Weston and back from Weston, the work we've done ourselves on the restoration, miscellaneous repairs that we paid for the old HVAC components, and so forth. We anticipate this is going to be on the order of $1.9 million, which is a very nice chunk of change that we'll be hopefully getting back before the end of 2026. We'll see. So what remains to be done? Well, in the grand scheme of the 10 years it took us to get to this point, not a lot, but what remains is important. We have to complete the repairs to our old system components I described earlier. We anticipate that being done by the end of March or early April at the latest. We have to continue grooming the operation of the system into the mixed mode this spring and through the air conditioning this summer to make sure that all the rooms are heated and cooled at the right time and the right schedule to the right temperatures. We'll hopefully be making just minor adjustments as going forward. Landscaping repairs need to be completed outside. We have some detailed staff training, which surprisingly is not all that much. Our church administrator will learn how to schedule when the rooms are occupied, which will in turn um, turn on the heating and cooling at the appropriate times and set the set points back when the rooms aren't occupied. We need to get a mass of technical documentation from Greener U and vendors. We have to complete a service contract for long-term support, which also good news there. There's actually not a lot of ongoing service that needs to be done on the geothermal system. Twice a year, really inspecting fan belts and changing air filters. The rest is all monitored long-term remotely. Finally, the system that controls the lighting, the inside lights and the outside lights of the building, according to a schedule, just happened to fail about a month ago. You may have noticed the steeple lights are not on. That's why. We looked at, first of all, an old system like that isn't made anymore. So we would have to buy a new system anyway. We looked at the various options, and what we've done is we've added it to the same building management system that controls the geothermal system. So when our church administrator, Kirsten, sets the schedule for rooms, that will key not only the heating and cooling, but also the proper lighting to go on. So we anticipate all that be done by, again, the end of April. So we're looking very good. If you have any further questions, feel free to contact Kathy Schleier or myself. Always, you can always stop Emilio DeVecchio in the hall around the church and ask him. And we would appreciate any feedback you have on it. This will likely be our last report to the congregation in this format until the next annual report. So thank you all very much for the wonderful thing we've created here, all the support you've given us and patience you've shown in getting this thing operational.